Okay. Okay, I think everyone can see that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah, please.
Simona, good to see you. Hello, everybody.
Hi,
Hello,
good to see you.
hello,
Very
Florinela.
Hi,
Evangelos.
Sorin.
Good morning, Evangelos. How are you?
Good morning, fine, thank you very much.
Everything is fine in Greece?
Yes, it's great. Every time in Greece, everything is fine.
Italy and even in Emirates, I think. No, Zoe?
Yeah, it's very hot here. It's 50 degrees today.
We should be all on their places, Zoe. Thank you a lot, everybody. I take the floor. Simona, you can manage together this.
Simona, where are you living now?
well, I'm in Turin right now, so I'm still working with New York University too, but I'm living in Turin.
Okay.
So we just left before the pandemic started,
Okay.
luckily, because it's crazy there. Well, it's crazy here too, but
You are in a very beautiful city.
yeah, hopefully we'll be able to meet soon again here and, you know, there and
We hope.
in different places. I'm trying to share my presentation, but yeah, it just allows me. Yeah. Okay, can you see it?
Yeah,
Perfect.
that's
Thank
clear.
you so much.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
And Simona, do you want to try? Oh, sorry, Florinella, you just did.
It's try to share my screen. Yes, I can. I think I. This one. Share. It's okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, all good.
Okay. Stop share. Okay.
Okay, so this is welcome everyone to the Intercultural Communication, Food Culture and Edu-Semiotics track. So my paper, All the World's a Stage, Semiotic Representations on Instagram is first, and this is followed by Simona Stano's Semiosis in Digital Communication, the Food Sphere Between Disinformation and Misinformation. And that's followed by Florinella Floria's paper, Rethinking Cultural Heritage, Food and Meanings. And there was an unconfirmed paper. I don't know if the presenter for that is here. No. Okay. So I will begin then. So my name is Zoe Hurley, and I'm based at Zayed University in Dubai, in the United Arab Emirates, and I completed my PhD at Lancaster University in the United Kingdom. So my paper is titled All the World's a Stage, Semiotic Self-Representations on Instagram. And in this paper, I'm asking, to what extent could Instagrammers' self-representations be theorized through a person semiotic framework? Now, when I first proposed this paper to the conference, I was going to use an edu-semiotic perspective, but subsequently, as it's been quite a long time, I've moved away from that, and I'll be explicitly applying a Pearson approach. And my research comes out of the Middle Eastern context in which I'm based, and to a certain extent problematizes Eurocentric perspectives of self-presentations. So I do briefly discuss some of the literature surrounding self-representations, and then I speak briefly about the person semiotic framework that I developed, the methods of inquiry that come out of that. And then I'll very briefly talk about, give a snapshot of some of my findings discussion conclusion, and also some of the publications that have come out of my study. So in terms of the background and focus of the study, semiotic theorizing is developed through the philosophical works of Charles Sanders Peirce, and it takes examples of self-representations on Instagram, the image and video sharing social networking site, as a case to consider deep-seated cultural, socioeconomic, environmental, and historical signs for self-representation. The paper comes out of a series of iterations of the research, which was based at a women's-only university in Dubai. Now, in the Middle East, some Arab women are prolific social media influencers and have a significant number of followers, some in the thousands, some in the millions. However, some of these influencers may never show their face online. So this study considers self-representations beyond a Eurocentric perspective, as well as developing a nuanced person semiotic perspective to go beyond normative interpretations. In terms of current literature, in particular media and communication scholarship, a lot of the discussion of self-representations is based on social semiotics and ultimately Ferdinand Saussure's semiology. Self-representations have been defined as the written and quantitative information relayed about the self, whereas self-presentations are associated with impression management, the conscious and/or subconscious processes by which people attempt to influence the perceptions of others through regulating, framing, controlling information in social interaction. But divisions between representation and self-presentation can be difficult to delineate. In this study, self-representation conveys intersections of self, representation, presentation. This helps to ask important semiotic questions about the self. Who are we? What are we from a semiotic perspective? This is important because modes of self-representation on visual social media, including Instagram, are entangled within social cultural discourses and an array of signs. The way that we see ourselves, experience, present, display, and hide aspects of our identities are not entirely individual, but socially constituted through cultures, histories, environments, gender, racial and semiotic histories. Our social subjectivities use an array of signs to communicate who we are. But because these constructions, meanings, and interpretations are situated, contextual, and global and historical. I provide here an example of a Emirati influencer, from someone from the UAE called Maitha Al-Maith, and she has over 6,000 followers, and across her over 6,000 posts, she never shows her face online. Nevertheless, these are still self-representations. Similarly, At Kudis, who's a Qatari influencer, who has a different style and genre of self-representations, also never shows her face. So how are we to, analyze this? A person semiotic perspective of self-representations helps to address certain tensions in social media theory and cultural and communications theory, and problematizes some central concepts that are really being taken for granted. In particular, scholarship of self-representations frequently references the sociologist Erving Goffman and his dramaturgical or theatrical conception, and ultimately binary of backstage versus front stage identity presentation. While I would agree that the self is performative, and from a person perspective, it is considered performative. Can we really divide secular, non-secular, backstage, front stage, public, private, in this neat way? This question is really relevant to the increasing intersections of offline, online living, or the collapsed contexts of physical material spaces and social media practices. Significantly, there are other theories making this point. For example, Back et al. Argue in a quantitative manner that backstage and front stage self-representations are indelibly connected, and that the backstage is inferable from observation of the front stage. So I believe that these perspectives are pertinent to the Middle East context, but also globally. A person semiotic perspective overrides Cartesian understandings of the self. The self from a semiotic perspective occurs through a range of signs, or we have a signs, even backstage or when we're in private spaces. However, from a person perspective, precise engagement, interpretation, or positionality can never be assumed. Furthermore, through signs, we are disembodied and re-embodied as avatars, photos, and videos. The extended self involves sharing multiple scattered signs and varying aspects of our visual identities across different platforms. And I'm sure the following speakers they're going to talk about images of food in their presentations, but here I included an image of smashed avocado on toast, and the social semioticians Michelle Zapovigna and Andrew Ross recently published this article talking about how images of avocado toast on Instagram are highly indicative of Australian millennials' economic opportunities and challenges. However, while the concept of a core self is being eroded via digital re-embodiment and the scattering of signs, Belk reminds us that the illusion of self as unified, as authentic, remains an influential concept. So out of this theorizing of the literature, this led me to developing the interpretive semiotic inquiry of the study. So the semiotic philosophy of Peirce develops a sophisticated doctrine of signs. So at a very basic level, and this is something that most people in media and communications scholarship might throw in when they mention Peirce, is the basic signs, the representement, the object, and the interpretant. And these are the signs occurring in Tango as a kind of process. However, in an earlier paper written by Peirce, we are reminded that Peirce was a scientist and a chemist and used his scientific training to develop semiotic theorizing of the self. Earlier in his academic career, this paper, Man's Glassy Essence, contains themes which are cogent with his later ideas. Here, Peirce views the self as being in perpetual motion and, like other matter, inseparable from its environment. This locates subjectivities as occurring in constant molecular motion, like the heating of gases. The self is not a fixed substance, but signs in motion. Interestingly, in this paper, Peirce also discusses the corporate self to identify how subjectivities are not entirely individual, but social. And in many ways, this idea of the corporate self is a forerunner to the branded self of visible economies, whereby in contemporary media, we frequently see people datifying, promoting, and branding the self as an object. Later, Peirce published his tenfold classification of signs. This is a complex doctrine. In particular, each of the 10 sign classes are considered separately, but they give an especially useful account of the 10th class, the argument, which involves a symbol and a legis sign. These are the norms. However, it's not simply a taxonomy, but an inferential process. And here is a screenshot of some of the diagrams found in Peirce's letters that he wrote to the semiotician Victoria Welby. So I applied this diagrammatic process to analyze a large corpus of Instagram self-representations by Arab women. And then more recently, I've started applying it to Western women influencers on Instagram. And Peirce's doctrine is a complex abductive process, but at basic levels, it's faithful to Peirce's sign triad and essentially the idea of reams. And these are the observable signs that we can see. And the DC signs, these are the mental images that signs conjure in our minds, and the descents, indexical signs in interpretation pointing to different meanings. So having explained the conceptual framework of my research, I'll briefly explain the analytic steps of the inquiry of the Instagram images. So first of all, it just involved identification of the sign elements of the Instagram images, what could be seen. Then description of the qualities of the images. What are they like and what's happening? This led to exploration of the meanings in relation to sign arguments, and then conceptual links to how the above could be inferred to address the research question. So in terms of findings, the findings were vast, broad, and in depth. And I've been using this approach for a number of years now, and I've generated a large corpus of images. So here, for the purpose of this talk, I'm just giving a snapshot of how the framework was applied, in this case, to a screen grab of the Western social media influencer @Zoella, who is a very popular British social media influencer. So applying the framework, the sign elements considered the observable visual elements, the colors, the number of social actors, the locations, the props. So then in terms of qualities, I considered the visual and conceptual objects. So things like coffee that she's drinking, candles, the snug clothing, beauty products, and how they coalesce and combine with the shots of feminized accessories, and how these all come together to convey a sense of comfort, warmth, sweet smells. So in terms of meanings, all of these signs coalesce as compound sign objects or sign arguments within the semantic field of coziness, or what might be called hygge. And I'm probably pronouncing it wrong, but hygge is the Danish concept and popular aesthetic of lifestyle Instagrammers who relish simple comforts in order to promote products and themselves. So these compound sign objects convey hygge, while possible interpretants are anchored via legis signs or norms, combining specific reams, the observable signs, descents, the mental images, and DC signs, which are the indexical signs interpretation, to render effective and conceptual experiences of feminized contentment. In terms of conceptual links, in this case of @Zoella, the signs or posts combine to establish this hygge through all of the reams, descents, and DC signs. From a Pearson perspective, Hygge is considered at abductive levels via these compound signs that stitch together varying material, routine, and conceptual meanings inferred via the elements of the compound signs. And what we can see here is how Zoella is using autumn, the season, as an opportunity to accessorize, color coordinate, and promote products. The person perspective illustrates Hygge as indicative of Zoella's corporate, what he would call corporate identity, or today we would call brand. So all the objects within the images are compound signs that index at Zoella's subjectification, her warm clothing, the scented candles, palette of eyeshadows are symbol and lexical signs for the subjectification of feminized Hygge. However, we can't assume that there is some backstage to all of these signs, or that there's a real or entirely authentic way of experiencing the self beyond the signs that we have at our disposal. Ultimately, from a person perspective, all we have are signs which are developed through semiosis in constant process. Overall, this person framework helps to highlight the notion of compound sign concepts developed through analysis, illustrating the coalescing icons, symbols, and indexical signs of Instagrammers. Person theorizing enunciates that visual signs, in my opinion, are more than just a language or grammar to be read or experienced external to the self. Rather, they culminate as broad, abductive concepts. Other concepts beyond Hygge might be authenticity, liberation, femininity, masculinity. So signs of self are aggregated across multiple receptors within us, externally, and all around us in the universe of signs. So this perspective aligns with Yuri Lotman's notion of semiosphere, whereby culture is an evolving collection of signs, and social actors navigate the world through sign inquiry, sign creation, and semiosis. Thus, as Shakespeare articulates in his 7 Ages of Man speech, all the world is a stage. He knew that all we have are these performative ways of showing the self. And Peirce talks about the symphony of signs in which we are engaged in. Applying the semiotic person framework helps to illustrate aspects of self-representations and self in semiosis. So in conclusion, person theorizing overrides theoretical nostalgia for self-representations of the coherent, essential, or Cartesian self. And I believe that person theorizing has scope for developing important insights into discourses of race, gender, and power as compound sign constructs and sign arguments. This goes beyond dramaturgical perspectives while challenging visual essentialism. And this is my last slide. I know it's more conventional to show the references of the paper, but this is just to signpost some of the publications that I've had that have come out of my research that I hope colleagues here may find interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, of course.
Okay, thanks so much. So yeah, good morning, everyone again. My name is Simona Stano, and I work as a tenure track assistant professor at the University of Turin in Italy, and as visiting research scholar at New York University. Today, I'm going to present some reflections on the processes of semiosis in digital communication, so the food sphere between disinformation and misinformation. Let's begin from a crucial consideration. Food disinformation and misinformation have become a major concern in contemporary societies. News on poisonous or miraculous foods fill up the daily agenda of the mass and the new media, through which they spread widely and are likely to affect people's perceptions of edibility and behaviors, independently from their reliability. So now, while considerable efforts have improved food risk communication, no extensive research has addressed this increasing phenomenon. It is not sufficient to debunk the so-called food myth, as it is often the case, but it is necessary to understand the textual and discursive strategies underlying them, as well as the effects of meaning deriving from such strategies. So, building on the results of my Marie Curie funded research project Communication for Food Protection, which aims precisely at filling this gap, and some specific case studies I analyzed within the project, I am going to describe the semiocultural domain, semiocultural and communicative dynamics underlying the propagation of food myth on and through the so-called Web 2.0. And this will also allow me to encompass crucial aspects of the contemporary debate on digital media communication and the processes of meaning making associated with it. So the first case study I would like to focus on concerns gluten and more generally grains. This is a research I actually started dealing with various years ago as related to the propagation of a series of increasingly spread food narratives and especially conspiracy theories. So the starting point of such theories and narratives can be traced back to these two books that you can see on the screen. Neurologist David Perlmutter's bestseller Grain Brain, dating 2013, and cardiologist William Davis' bestseller Wheat Belly Total Health, 2014, enlargement of his already very popular book Wheat Belly. Moreover, Davis and Perlmutter have developed a very rich network of digital media and text around such books and the ideas they contain, as this slide suggests. So we don't have the time to consider here in detail, but to the purposes of my presentation, it is worthwhile to remind at least some crucial points deriving from the analysis of this rich network. So first of all, based on the opposition between a euphoric past and a dysphoric present marked by the interest of what they call the agribusiness and what they denounce as the lies of modern technology, both Perlmutter and Davis invite their addressee to accept them as their sender and thus to assume the attention role of receivers. Such a contract is based on the promise to provide them with the competence, a specific knowing how to do, allowing a specific being able to do, allowing them to a performance that is defined as not only desirable, but also necessary and urgent, as it intervenes on a situation that is causing the damage and even the death of the body. Both print and digital communications, in fact, insist on the opposition between, on the one hand, nature, that of the human body, and on the other hand, culture, or better, the opposition between two different cultures, which on such a nature intervenes in opposite ways. So we have a dysphoric culture one, which finds expression in modern industry and technological progress, and causes pollution and damage, inevitably leading to illness and ultimately death. And then we have a euphoric culture two, that is an alternative culture, which sees Davis and Perlmutter as its main promoters, of course, or in their words, crusaders, as you can see on the screen, and which can result in a regained and total health, precisely as it contrasts and opposes culture one. At the discursive level, this finds expression in a specific rhetoric of change and revelation that aims to place culture one in the context of lies, what seems but is not, as Greimas teaches us, or at most of secrets, what is but does not seem. and the alternative culture too on the side of truth, what is and seems, or rather of its revelation. With respect to the articulation of the ideological universe of the relationship between discourse and reality, this does not find correspondence in the use of the representational function of language, which is only partially present in such texts, both the digital and the print ones, and with a series of problems concerning the sources of the information reported and its reliability that I highlighted in the past, but rather in the construction of a markedly mythical and partly oblique strategy, which draws on personal success stories, which is a very common strategy they use, and on a direct emotive and cognitive involvement of the reader. Such an approach is evidently opposite to that of the scientific discourse, which relies instead on a movement of adaptation to reality that is, as we know, based on a descriptive, logical, and rational procedure, as detached as possible from subjective points of view and constructing strategies. Yet, such an approach has managed to firmly take root in the collective imaginary as an equally valid and shared paradigm, as evidenced by the alarming growth in the number of people who, even in the absence of a confirmed diagnosis of the celiac disease or other recognized pathologies, decide to avoid gluten and more generally grains from their diet on a durative basis. An approach, ultimately, which refers to the broader question of the comparison between science and myth, where the latter, far from simply coinciding with a lack of knowledge, a false belief, and unfounded opinion, as a widely diffused conception interprets it, instead seems to ask more and more insistently to be brought back into the context of those processes of signification that, as Malinowski, Barth, Levi-Strauss, and other prominent scholars have pointed out, identify it as a type of knowledge that is different from scientific and rational thought, but nevertheless effective, since it contributes to shed light on the obscurities of meaning, especially in the face of the impossibility of science to provide holistic and comprehensive explanations. It is also essential to notice that from the point of view of communication processes, in both cases, so in both Davis and Perlmutter's case, the book is only the starting point and at the same time of arrival, as the recurring references to the works on websites, social networks, and television broadcasts suggest, of a broader intertextual network. A network that functions as a real echo chamber where people are exclusively exposed to information from like-minded individuals. So it's only about reactions, approving what these doctors affirm. This, as it has been remarked by various scholars, tends to generate homogeneous clusters favoring the so-called effect of group polarization. In this sense, the mechanism for regulating access to information and discussing spaces used by both authors and especially by Davis, and you can see some examples here on the screen, play a crucial role. As demonstrated by, for instance, Quattrociocchi and Vicini, users involved in a community are more likely to focus on specific topics and points of view, isolating themselves from what surrounds them or from alternative topics and points of view. And the strategies used, especially in the social media and on the website by both authors are significant in this sense. A mechanism of emotional contagion, which has to do with the so-called phenomenon of post-truth and more generally with the progressive crumbling of the separation between reality, fact, and fiction, also seems to be at play. As Habermas highlighted, in fact, news and reports and even editorial opinion are dressed up with all the accoutrements of entertainment literature. What in this way only intimates itself in the daily press has progressed farther in the newer media. Under the common denominator of so-called human interest emerged the mixtum compositum of a pleasant and at the same time convenient subject for entertainment, then, instead of doing justice to reality, has a tendency to present a substitute more palatable for consumption and more likely to give rise to an impersonal indulgence in stimulating relaxation than to public use of reason. And that's exactly what we can see in these examples. Thus, the global village postulated by McLuhan is rapidly taking the shape of an alternative media ecosystem, namely a complex network of individuals and domains that, among other things, originate and promote specific narratives that undermine online readers' trust in official information and strengthen their trust in that channel, that information they can find on the channel. Constantly echoed in the intertextual networks that I just briefly described, the belief systems proposed by Davis and Perlmutter have been strengthened exponentially, cutting out alternative visions and favoring the development of an extremely rapid and therefore difficult to control and contrast cyber cascade, which generally makes the feeling of belonging to that community prevail over fact-checking. And that's in fact what we can see on their forums, blogs, and social media. Such an aesthetic deviation, as Massimo Leone called it, produces crucial effects on the processes of production and circulation of meaning. In fact, it is precisely through it that the ban on gluten and more generally on grains was able to overcome the boundaries themselves already very extended, as indicated by the huge number of copies of books sold by Davis and Perlmutter, of the pages of Grain Brain and Wheat Belly Total Health, to pervade the digital imaginary, thus spreading globally and reaching also the political and institutional debate in many countries. In Italy, in fact, that was the case. But let's move rapidly to a second and last case study that I would like to consider here, which is partially different, but also shares something with the case I just discussed. This is the case of GM foods. Well, it is essential, first of all, to clarify what is meant by GMO and GM foods, and what are the main problematic aspects related to present-day mythologies on genetically modified foods. In fact, although scientific consensus on the safety of GM foods has increased in recent years, most people still perceive them as a major threat for health. Now, the World Health Organization defines GMOs as, I'm quoting, organisms in which the genetic material has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally by mating and/or natural recombination. The technology allows selected individual genes to be transferred from one organism into another, also between non-related species. Although largely shared and adopted by a number of institutional entities at the international level, such a description is highly problematic. Not only does it refer to a classification system based on the techniques of production of the considered organism rather than on their final characteristics, but it relies on manifestly arbitrary and not at all clear criteria for defining the naturalness of such techniques. According to the European legislation, for instance, some practices, such as the recombination of nucleic acids, cell fusion, or the injection of external heritable material into one organism, are considered the forms of genetic modification, while others, such as the so-called mutagenesis or some methods of cell fusion not involving nucleic acids recombination, are not. This creates a series of borderline cases, as well as huge differences in legislation, with the US, for instance, preventing federal judges from introducing any ban on the sale of GMOs, not without opposition and bottom-up initiatives increasingly manifesting discontent towards such a regulation, versus Europe adopting a precautionary principle that bans instead any recognized genetic modification of food, even though with such contradictions. Now, from a semiotic point of view, it is particularly interesting to focus on the collective representations of the nature, culture, mythology underlying present-day narratives concerning GM foods, especially focusing on the digital media. That's what I'm going to do. So first of all, it is essential to note the differential and intuitive characterization of nature suggested by such a mythology. Nature is how things are originally, with such an origin being either a here crystallized in an idyllic past to be preserved, or rather is still uncontaminated elsewhere to be safeguarded. In any case, it consists in denying culture, which is generally associated with a negative axiologization. On the contrary, most of the representations, and accordingly to this view, of course, most of the representations of GM products are characterized as terminative from an expectual point of view, that is connoted as the end of a transformation process and even a subversion of the natural order. Thus, the mechanism of manipulation of food become predominant, finding expression through figurative elements such as the human hands, which are generally carefully protected by latex gloves, as in any hazardous scientific experiment, and injections, which are in fact very recurrent, as you can see. Oranges, kiwis, apples, watermelons, banana peels revealing salamis inside, and other visual paradoxes, furthermore, evidently mark the dysphoric characterization of such a process. If the lack of processes of alteration in natural products, such as the organic ones, suggests a valedictory intent, that is, making such products appear as they are, transgenic foods rather oscillate between secret, they do not seem what they are, and lie, they are not what they seem. Consistently, as regards to the distinction introduced by Jean-Marie Floch between the representational and the constructing function of language that we recalled a while ago too, communication of GM foods seems to oscillate between an oblique strategy, a strategy based on paradoxes, hyperboles, and forms of irony aimed at highlighting the dangers related to their consumption, and the mythical strategy inserting food into new narratives and investing them with symbolic meanings. The recurrent figure of Frankenfoods that you can see on the left is emblematic in this sense. Pieces of fruits sutured together evidently recall Mary Shelley's famous novel, thus evoking the dysphoric myth of a science that dares to go beyond the limits of humanity and is therefore destined to succumb to its own creations. Such an idea is in fact very common in the debate on genetically modified foods. In 1998, for instance, Prince Charles reproached food biotechnologists for taking humankind into realms that belong exclusively to God, warning his readers about the long-term consequence I'm quoting, for human health and the wider environment of releasing plants bred in this way. Similarly, Pope John Paul declared that using genetically modified organisms to increase production was contrary to God's will, also advising farmers that when they forget, I'm quoting again, this basic principle and become tyrants of the earth rather than its custodians, sooner or later the earth repels. In relation to communicative processes and strategies, things partially differ in this case from what we observed in the previous one. Social media are in fact generally characterized here by confrontation and opposition between a few GM food supporters and a number of GM foods opponents, as we can see in the case of the Facebook page of the non-GMO project that you can see here on the screen. Again, unfortunately, I do not have the time to analyze the page into detail, but it's interesting to point out at least some crucial issues. First of all, it is essential to notice, sorry, the animations, okay. The high level of intertextuality characterizing the lively debate generated by each post. Here you can see just some comments on a very long thread. An intertextuality that makes the magmatic characterization of present-day myth, as Peppino Ortoleva calls it, evident. Here, for instance, the myth of zombie Frankenfood, again, is recalled together with that of Nature, as we described it a moment ago, also highlighting the crucial issue of spreadability. As Jenkins, Ford, and Green highlighted, in fact, online contents are not replicated perfectly, but rather manipulated by users, who play, therefore, a key active role in their diffusion. This means that the internet does not merely enhance the replicability of the text that circulate within it, but rather fosters their personalization and resemantization by means of mechanism of manipulation that function as a hook to both users' engagement and agency. In other words, any form of appropriation of an online text tends to restructure it, creating new forms and leading to its reinterpretation. So we have different dynamics at play, dynamics of sampling, remixing, and remaking. And it's very interesting because they actually change the meaning of text, but sometimes also subverting it. And still people follow, supporting them. So regardless of the specific mechanism in action, it is important to notice that people do not simply spread online contents as they are, but always modify and incessantly reinterpret them. This also seems to foster the same aesthetic deviation that I mentioned in the previous case. That is to say, the convergence of different languages, making the feeling of belonging to a specific web community prevail on any search of truth and pertinence. Here is where the issue of post-truth arises again, reminding us that in present days digital rhetoric, the subjective and passionate component has become evidently prevalent over the referential one, to the extent that the personal beliefs have replaced the verified facts. And maybe this is why, for instance, the books by Davis and Perlmutter worked so well, because they had that kind of logic in them, and which was then used in their social media too. It is not therefore facts, verified sources and data that matter, but rather likes and various reactions in a real battle to make one's voice not only heard, but also and especially endorsed and shared by others. Thus, let's call it social trust emerges and becomes the base of a number of alternative narratives whose verification transcends any reference to evidence and rather relies on other narratives, as a number of scholars have noticed, and as the short extracts on the screen suggest. So this can give origin to real degenerations of meaning, which are as semiotically interesting as they are pragmatically dangerous, such as in this case, where an overcooked, in a material sense, egg ends up being overcooked also in a symbolic sense, as Levi-Strauss would have said, as a result of a series of subsequent resemantizations that exalt certain values and narcotize others, thus naturalizing specific views of the world, which, as Roland Barthes taught us, is precisely what myth does, calling semiology into action to deneutralize it, deciphering the codes and discursive operations activated by the ideologies that produced it. And so that's exactly what I'm trying to do in my project. I went very briefly through some of the cases, but well, just recalling Barthes' word, I think that's crucial issues nowadays, since we are increasingly exposed to these kind of phenomena and mechanism. And so with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Simona. That was really, really fascinating. Are there any questions for Simona? Maybe we'll...
Yeah, forgive me, Zoe. I took the word before because I thought we were going to have the discussion in the end. So sorry.
Yeah, we can.
Oh, okay.
We can do. I don't know either.
Okay.
Or maybe we'll do that. So we'll go to Florinella.
I will share my screen. Sorry. Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Florinella Floria from Vasile Alexandru University of Bacău, Romania. I am a lecturer at the Faculty of Letters of this university, and I have a PhD thesis in semiotics. It was a kind of semiotic approach of alterity. And yeah, in last years, I work on the problem of cultural heritage. And as a member of a scientific project entitled Digitization of cultural heritage in the region of Bacău, the region where I came from. Yes, I made many researches about in this topic of cultural heritage. And today I want to present to you this project and also communication campaign, let's say, entitled 105 recipes in Romania. Yeah, under the problem of meanings, food and meanings. Most classifications of the food activity insert the food practice in its social context. But if gastronomy is a speech act, food represents firstly a cultural act. This means that the way we understand and we relate to food practices is always related to our identity in the deepest manner. The danger that comes along with this approach is to understand these fundamental dimensions, identity, food, culture, on their ontological or essentialist dimension, shifting from identity to the identification of the good, the best, the ideal in culinary or in gastronomy. So this problem of the relations between identity, food, and culture will be the topic of my presentation, and we'll treat food as a semiotic object, let's say, and also we'll try to follow the language, the communicative dimension of food, as some semioticians mention it. For example, Marcel Danesi considers food as an element of cultural semiotics between nature, the biosphere, and the culture, semiosphere. There is a denotative level and also a connotative level. At the denotative level, food represents, of course, a survival substance, but at the connotative level, food items become signs that assume specific kind of meanings. Cultures vary widely as to the types and the degrees of meanings they assign to food and eating. Also, anthropological and ethnological studies show that beyond its role in the primary needs of human, food must be interpreted as a signifying system. The structuralism thinking considers food as a language in a specific cultural background. Food is considered a realized signifier system by Williams, and also generally referring to a way of life and of living. Food is considered a specific and organized system of acted and activated practices, meanings, and values. Marcel Danesi presented some food codes. For example, the order in which the dishes are presented, what combination can be served in tandem, how the foods are to be placed on table, who has preference in being served, who must show deference, who does the speaking and who the listening, who sits where, and what topics of conversation are appropriate for this. Also, we want to present the Roland Barthes perspective for food as a communicational system, a system of science, Barthes said, and the units of this system are very subtiles. Barthes identifies, for example, a syntactic level and also some different styles in approaching the food discourse. He say food is not only a collection of products that can be used for statistical or nutritional studies. It is also, and at the same time, a system of communication, a body of images, a protocol of usages, situation and behavior. Information about food must be gathered wherever it can be found by direct observation in the economy, in techniques, usage, and advertising, and indirect observation in the mental life for living society. And he considers that food is a semiotic system, and the units will be products, techniques, and habits. And another perspective that I want to mention in this context, the perspective of Gianfranco Marone. He affirmed in his book Semiotics and Critics of Cultures that food is a language. And I will cite, we know food is a language. Yeah. It is used to communicate with others, to express oneself, to interpret the world, to strengthen cultural tradition, to represent social hierarchy, to classify natural species. In addition to its purely nutritional, sensory, fun, historical, and cultural dimension, food has a specificality, semiotic dimension. Perhaps even more and better than many other systems of human social significance, everything related to human nutrition makes sense, from the material chosen to the techniques to transform them to the modality of their ingestion. Food makes sense precisely because it present the characteristics of real language. According Gianfranco Maroni perspectives, this perspective of food as a language has two important dimensions. First of all, it is talking about food, le langage de la nourriture, and then food as a specific form of language. So it's a discourse about the food and also the food as discourse itself. And in the first category, there are all the conversations or the magazines, books of recipes and so on, all the discourses which presenting the food, and it's a big amount of this kind of representation of food in contemporary society. And then also, yeah, the other level is the level of identifying the world, you know, the reality beyond the food, because the food is an entire universe too, and we are demanded to discover it. And also because we consider that cooking is a total social fact. The problem of food is very related to the tradition, to the cultural heritage. At the level at food practices as also a component of living culture. Food identity is related to this intangible cultural heritage, and also the different gastronomic practices and action. These food practices that we could observe, some of them are following the traditional way, are more oriented to the tradition, but some others are more oriented to the innovation, the creativity, interpreting the tradition. And that's why we talk about this question of intangible cultural heritage as UNESCO defining it. The food and food practices is an important part of this intangible cultural heritage. Which is associated to the transmission in a community of experiences, of knowledges, of practices. But for the food domain, there, in the international list, there are, for example, some topics like Mediterranean diet or repas gastronomique français, some traditions related to the beer craft and so on. But referring to the Romanian elements regarding to the intangible cultural heritage, there is repertory of this intangible cultural heritage of Romania. It includes forms of narrative art and traditional oral expressions, folk music, dance, some games for kids, for children and teens, ritual, traditional medicine, and also traditional cuisine. But even the existence of this repertory, none of this food related tradition, Romanian tradition, are not included in the UNESCO list. There are some topics, but not some related to the food. And in this context, the project like this one that I want to present today, try to identify the specificity for the cultural heritage, the food cultural heritage in the Bacău region, the region where I came from. And it was a project which the research team was included a group representing Vasile Alexandru University, and another one came from Alexandru Ioan Cuza University of Iași, and also a cultural association, Art, Tradition, Patrimony Without Borders. The project was rolled in between 2016 and 2018. The aim of the project was to discover this and rediscover the food-related cultural knowledge reflected in the common food practices in the region of Bacău. The methodology in that case implies the collection of ethnographical information, and then this information was processed in a multi-media system. At the end, as a result of the project, there is a multimedia atlas, a kind of multimedia collection of elements of patrimony, of food patrimony in the Bacău region. You can see on the screen the website of the project, ecultfood.ub.ro. These are the main results of this project. You could find inside the website resources, all the resources organized after according the ingredients or according the place, the city, the region where the recipe came. And also there is another possibility to search according some specific topic, which represented the elements of local food heritage in Bacău. Department of Bacău, it made part from the eastern from Moldova. So these are typical recipes from this part of Romania. And the resources, the recipes, if we search on this keyword, alivenci, which is a typical corn pie, in this region, you could find this the presentation of this pie as it was found in different regions in Bacău, and the recipes are presented in two important manners. It was a recipe prepared, then it was made of film during the preparation of this product, and also some other recipes are narrated. So during the discussion with the informer, at the village that where the research was realized, the person sometimes realized this cooked the product, but sometimes, or in most of the case, he presented all many other food-related information, because the objective, the aim of the research was to identify these elements which were documented before in the previous ethnological researches. So if there is this Ecultfood website, and also Ecultfood Facebook page, and also an Ecultfood channel. And it's very interesting that this kind of short film has a big amount of views, and you could also search some traditional present food, some traditional element of cultural heritage related to the food in this website. The elements of food system in Bacău region, but not only Bacău region, are organized according this category of food, beverages, then according to the ingredients, herbal food, that means vegetarian or not vegetarian, alcoholic or food, alcoholic or non-alcoholic beverages. Then yeah, specific ingredients, wheat, corn, etc. Preparation tools are important. Presence of a transforming agent, preparation process, preparation agent, and so on. All of these elements serve to classify and to organize the elements of food system in Bacău region. And it's interesting that all the product of this research was in fact recipes, some presentation of some traditional food, recovering some specific some recipes. That small video presentation try to present. And this is another project that I want to refer. It's called 105 Recipes. It's not a research project. It started as a personal, personal hobby of his creator, but in his journey through the country and trying to rediscover traditional local way of cooking, local way of eat, let's say, he covers 100 recipes from all the country, and finally he was associated with Dnata, with a restaurant, with a catering company in Romania, and this series of recipes became a kind of communication campaign in 2018, which was the centenary year for Romania. It was 100 years since Romania exists, and this project was became a kind of opportunity to present Romanian traditional kitchen. The goal are still recipes. Most of them are have a video presentation and also have an English translation, which is very important for someone who want to learn more about Romanian cooking, and also it seems that these recipes could be found in the restaurants at the airport, in Otopeni Airport. So on the website of the airport, Otopeni Airport, you could find this 100 recipes. What kind of recipes? It's not a let's say scientific research. He declared that he's not a cooker or someone or ethnological or anthropologist. He's just a person who want to see how people are preparing the meal in Romania, and this selection, so it's not institutional, it's very personal. This is the discourse of a recipe for the website, yeah, Romanian name and also English name or English explanation of the name of the dish, where the person who present this and also the ingredients in bilingual presentation. It seems that the creator of the project has published a book also with this 100 recipes, but they could be consulted online easier. Yeah, most of them are this video presentation also. And in Gianfranco Marone book, there are two models, two interpretive models, and I want to say that in both cases that we presented today, the aim is to try to keep the natural. It's more nature what that we try to do in this or in the research project or in this 100 recipes of fire. And following the other another model which was offered by Jean-Jacques Bouteau and reiterated by Gianfranco Marone. These examples of cultural heritage, it's more emotional, more approach to us. It's a simple meal, homemade meal, and this character is very pregnant, very highlighted, for in both cases. And as a conclusion of our presentation, we'll reaffirm as Gianfranco Marone and other semioticians say it, that the food model is a cultural system which tend to dictate the rules for relating the elements and the ingredients, namely what we could call a canon of taste. And also in that context, the individual interprets this canon according to variations linked to the pleasures and necessities of the moment without ever completely transgressing them. Thank you. Thank you for
Okay, thank you, Florinella. That was really, really fascinating. Yeah, food as a system of communication. I learned a lot. I'm not sure if the fourth speaker has made it into the session, and I don't think we're doing that well for time anyway. So I don't know if anyone has any questions for any of the speakers.
I raised the hand.
Aha. Hello.
Hi. Thank you. I have a question to the Florina food and cultural heritage, because I'm working with intangible cultural heritage. I'm an expert somehow.
I think we already talked about it years ago.
Yeah. So North Korea and South Korea, we have the same food, kimchi, same food. And then because of this same food, both were inscribed to the UNESCO heritage. So food can be very political as well, diplomatic. UNESCO cultural heritage, but food can choose like Mediterranean food. Food can be a very good way to also intercultural approach. So you mentioned about the Romanian food. Do you have any food which was inscribed to UNESCO?
Yeah,
Okay,
anyone.
Okay, never mind. Then do you have any food inscribed your national inventory? Because it cannot be. Yeah.
Yes, we have a national inventory.
Sorry, can you hear me, please? I am Florian Zero. I am from the organizer, and you have only 7 minutes. Please, at 2 o'clock we'll end this session. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. I will share you this local information about the Romanian system.
No, what I want to say to you is that if you want to inscribe it to the UNESCO, you must have a national inventory first. You must join the national inventory. If you are not, you cannot be.
We have a national inventory. We have a national institute. We have some elements of the list, but not food. Some other elements, some dances, some traditions, but not food. But I will send to you this inventory. There is also in French. And I'm sorry for my English. It's not I'm not speaking very good English.
Yeah, thank you. You can talk in Korean. Thank you.
I feel really hungry now. I don't know if I'm the only one, and wishing more than ever that I was actually in Romania to try some of this food.
When you'll come, maybe you'll try to the airport one of these recipes.
Yeah, look forward to it. Are there any more questions for any of the speakers? Okay.
I just wanted to say that it was a very interesting opportunity to hear your communications, yours and Simona, and it was wonderful to hear you on the problem of this the self-presentation on Instagram. I am not on Instagram, but I had the question: if the men shows their faces on Instagram in Arabic culture, only women don't show
many women do, and there's a kind of vast range and spectrum, but I think that the point is that, you know, we don't just signify the self through the face, that there are many other symbols, and you know, there are stereotypical symbols that we might ascribe to masculinity in the Middle Eastern context, and on social media young guys might show a picture of their car or their falcon or some kind of symbol that represents the self. So it doesn't just have to be through the face. And you know, I think in Western context there are many negative associations with women wearing the niqab or the burqa and hiding their face, but it's not the same in the Middle East. And now from COVID, everybody's wearing masks, and I think that, you know, on social media increasingly we're going to be using different signs and symbols and avatars. So this idea, and what I'm just seeing in a lot of the theory that I'm reading is that people, you know, just frequently refer to Goffman, and although his writing is very interesting and, you know, has lots of potential, and I just feel that there are some tensions with this, the binary divisions. But I think we saw with Simona the backstage, front stage food, and the Franco food, that was like fascinating.
Yeah.
And Zoe, that could be interesting for you. Just a minute for this, if I have it. Well, first of all, I totally agree with you. I mean, for using Goffman for everything, especially when dealing with different cultural systems. That's what I was thinking about when you were giving your wonderful presentation. I mean, even the relation between private and the public sphere, and the way Goffman refers to it, of course, it's inserted in a cultural background, which is not the same as the one, you know, concerning the case you mentioned and presented. So yeah, I totally agree with that. And I worked on the past on the representation of Muslim women in the West. And so, yeah, that was exactly the case. Always, you know, applying the same lens, the Western ones, on that kind of representation, which in the end doesn't work very, very well, because, I mean, anthropology teaches us that. But yeah, then another issue that could be interesting for you, I don't know if you know Massimo Leone. Massimo Leone is a professor from Turin University. He now has an ERC project on the representation of the face in e-technological societies. So you might look for that, because they're also working on the different perception of the face nowadays with the COVID pandemic and the necessity to wear a mask everywhere in the public sphere. So that could be interesting for you. They release some publications, and you can find them, they are open access, so that you can find them on their website, Faces.
Yeah, I think he was he speaking yesterday?
Yes.
One of the,
Yes.
I did.
Yes.
I did see his work, and yeah, that is what you're saying. It's very much aligned with the things that I'm writing, and I think it's, you know, even going between this division of like Western and non-Western spaces, you know, I think that we need to start to problematize it, because within Muslim communities in the West, you know, that the headscarf can have many different affordances. And, you know, it's not just necessarily something negative. It can be a symbol of prestige, you know, and you've got people moving around transnational contexts, and, you know, the West, Europe isn't always the center of those, but I'll be interested to look more at your work. And
I will send it to you. I have an unofficial English translation of it, so I would be glad to send it to you. And then I published it in Italian, but I will send like the short version, which is in English.
Yeah, please. That would be. I can find your email on the program, maybe.
Yes, we have all them. So yeah, I'll find it. Thanks so much.
Okay, so thank you very much to everyone who attended our talks, and it's been great to have some conversations. So yeah, thank you to everybody, and the organizers especially.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. You too.